A lot of the conversation early on was around hallucinations. Now it's more around precision at scale. And so almost everyone wants the same thing. They want an omniscient foundation model driven capability that sits on all their data, that knows everything about their organization, is never out of date, and is cheap to operate. And getting there has been quite an odyssey.
Welcome to Founded and Funded. I'm Madrona Managing Director Karan Mehandru, here today with Brian Raymond, founder and CEO of 2024 IA40 winner Unstructured. Unstructured turns raw, messy, unstructured data into something AI tools can actually process, a typically expensive and time-consuming process for companies hoping to save money with the tools themselves. Founded in 2022, Unstructured hit the ground running at the height of the AI craze, with Brian at the helm as a first-time founder. Brian's background set him up to be uniquely qualified to tackle the data issues so many struggle with. He started off his career as an intelligence officer at the CIA before joining the National Security Council as the director for Iraq, and then spent 3 years helping build advanced AI solutions for the US government and Fortune 100 at Primer. Today, Brian and I explore some of the biggest trends in AI, including the rise and fall of vertical applications and the shift towards powerful horizontal solutions. Whether the ROI will be there on all this capital investment into AI and the trough of disillusionment, and why expectations in AI often don't match reality. We also discuss how an unlikely source, the public sector, is driving AI innovation today. It's a conversation you won't want to miss. So with that, here's Brian. Hey, welcome, Brian. Thanks for joining us today.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's dive right in. We've seen a ton of conversations and articles talking about LLM models. We saw the launch of O1 Strawberry, and obviously OpenAI just raised this massive round. But from where you sit, I don't hear a lot of talk about the pre-processing and, as you call it, the first mile of AI. So help us understand what's actually going on in the world of AI from the trenches of AI from where you sit.
I think a tremendous amount of energy to try and move generative AI workflows and applications from prototype into production. We've been talking about, it feels like the same thing for the last 18 to 24 months about when are we going to reach production on these things. And it's starting to happen. However, it's still very hard. And the instances in which these workflows or applications are making their production there's a lot of pattern matching that we can do now to know what our model's good at and what's still really hard. And on our end, we are focused every single day on the data that we make available to these foundation models and trying to help our users be successful and marshaling them for their business use cases.
Every company that we're involved in and every board that we're in, if it has to do with AI, there's at least a conversation about how we move things from prototype to production. So that's definitely happening, as you just mentioned that. What's actually underneath this migration of a lot of these vertical tools that came out, or vertical applications that came out, that were targeting interesting things, interesting workflow, but constrained to a certain domain, constrained to a certain verticalized application. And now we're seeing a ton of horizontal applications that are coming out as well, and doing some broad processing and broad RAG applications. So maybe walk us through, what are you seeing as far as the enablers and underneath some of these applications that are allowing some of these more interesting applications to get escape velocity?
Let's just take a step back first, and going from GPT-1, GPT-2, BERT, BART, these smaller models, you had token windows that were only maybe 24 tokens, right? And we had a huge leap forward to around 1,000 token window, 4 or 5,000 token windows, and even larger token windows. And with that, parameter size has increased. The amount of data and knowledge that are encoded into these models has become ever more powerful. The leap from GPT-3 to GPT Neo, then GPT 3.5 was, according to the big jump to GPT 4.0 was huge. But these same kind of problems have persisted around latency, around cost, and around performance, which is a lot of the conversation early on was around hallucinations. Now it's more around precision at scale. And so almost everyone wants the same thing. They want an omniscient foundation model driven capability that sits on all their data, that knows everything about their organization, is never out of date, and is cheap to operate. And getting there has been quite an odyssey. I think as an industry, we're making progress on that. But one of the big things that happened in the winter 2022 and then the 2023 was the temporary displacement of knowledge graphs for RAG. And RAG has been the dominant architectural paradigm. Interesting enough, knowledge graphs have crept back in, but within under the auspices of RAG, which means that you have ingestion and preprocessing. That's a necessary capability. You have external memory of these models in the form of vector and graph databases. You have orchestration observability frameworks, Arise, LangGraph, LangSmith, et cetera. And then you got the model providers. It's all sitting on compute, right? But those four, that's how we think about the world, are those four components. And the way that we're engaging with customers is they're producing hundreds of thousands or millions of new files a day. They want to take that and instantly use it in conjunction with foundation models. And we're really at the top of the funnel in the ingestion and pre-processing side of things, trying to take this heterogeneous data in terms of file types, in terms of document layouts, and get it in a format that's usable with large language models.
So the way I interpret that and the way we talk about it internally, you and I, has always been that companies like Unstructured have to exist and win for AI to reach its full potential, because that is truly the first mile. It's just the ability to take data that's sitting behind firewalls and inside these corporate enterprises and be able to make it ready for things like RAG that you just mentioned. Speaking about winning, there's obviously a layer cake that is developing inside the AI stack, and you've got NVIDIA and chips at the bottom end, and you've got some middleware tools, you've got an application sitting on top, and within that you've got LLM models. So as you think about this layer cake of value being created in this emerging stack, where do you think we're operating in a winner take all or winner take most dynamic, and where do you think it's going to be pretty distributed across a whole bunch of different companies that are going to be deemed as winners as we think about the next 3 to 10 years?
It's really interesting in thinking about how competition's unfolding. NVIDIA really has done some jujitsu on the market and moving from raw performance of individual chips to orchestrating those chips into massive data centers to unlock even more compute capability, not just for training, but for inference as well. And so they've changed the competitive dynamics at the hardware level. At the application level, it's become less about the models, in my opinion, and more about the UX. That it is a horse race on who can deliver the best user experience. In the middle, it's a combination of the two. And so you have verticalized applications that are relying on proprietary training data or proprietary access to models in order to deliver outsized value to their customers to race ahead, capture market share, and consolidate. And then you have others like us. We're a mix. We're a mix of focus on UX. We're a mix of focus on having access to the best models or knowing how to leverage them the best possible way. And then also for us, like having great relationships with the CSPs where a lot of this work's being done, which is in BPCs.
There's a lot of talk about the trough of disillusionment these days as well, and there were some slides being flying around from different venture firms that are talking about how much capital has gone into AI and how little revenue has come out the other side. And I remember it took over a decade for the modern data stack to emerge in the past. And so help us understand like the pace of innovation in AI relative to how much capital has been invested in companies like yours and many others, including the model layers as well. How do folks think about, how do you think about ROI? How do you think about the pace of innovation? And do you believe that the current level of investment in AI is justified? Or do you think that all the VCs, including the folks that are investing in AI, have expectations that are never going to be met?
We can look back to the internet, mobile, big data, different paradigm shifts. I think everyone's in agreement that there's a paradigm shift underway, the scale of which we haven't seen before and the velocity of change we haven't seen before. And you can ask about whether or not folks are moving too much capital too quickly, but I think that this is not, there's no going back from this. Now, if you were to look back at headlines a year ago, there was a lot of talk about like how big are models going to get? Are we going to run out of training data, et cetera? What you've seen is actually this divergent path from the model providers. You've seen models not only getting bigger and more performant, but you've also seen them getting smaller and more performant, which is really interesting. And what that means is that these models are going to be showing up everywhere. Apple has really been leading the way here on edge devices, but these generative models, frontier foundation models, whatever you want to call them, they're going to touch almost every aspect of your life. And it's really difficult to estimate, like, where does this stop, right? Like, when does it actually slow down? Just because if anything, we've seen the pace of acceleration, like the curve is logarithmic in terms of the pace of development here. And so I think if you look at pure productionization of these and the revenue, if you're just looking at 10K, 10Qs and then quarterly investor calls, I think you're going to miss the broader trend that's going on right now.
I've always said our brains don't understand the concept of compounding the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And so I think you've combined that with the fact that we're literally 2 years into when ChatGPT came out. So it's just
Yeah.
been 2 years. So it's still early days. And then you combine that with the fact that humans in general usually overestimate what you can do in 1 year and underestimate what you can do in 10. You
Yeah.
combine all of that, and I can totally see where you're coming from, which is it's early days, but this is unlike anything that anyone's ever seen. So I am equally bullish about the potential that this wave represents. I'm curious, with all that happening with this investment in AI, how are you, as the CEO and founder of Unstructured, how are you navigating it? How are you thinking about capital? How are you thinking about positioning the company as this market kind of matures? And sometimes these markets take a little while to mature. What's top of mind for you right now as you build a company, as you watch some of this innovation come in?
I'll talk about some of the things that have changed and some of the things that like haven't changed. Some things that have changed was that, when we started talking a couple years ago, Karan, we expected to be training our own models for a long time. And we expected that fine-tuned proprietary data on Apache licensed models, we're going to have a hard time being displaced for a while. The speed with which OpenAI and Anthropic in particular, but also like Gemini models have improved is breathtaking. And I think that has actually put a damper on a lot of fine tuning activities that are going on, or the need to fine tune. And it's pushed a lot of folks in the direction of investing more in architecture and how they're leveraging the models in the architecture, or just how they're even prompting the models. And so that's, I don't want to say caught us by surprise, but we didn't anticipate that, like the speed of change there in the last 2 years. What hasn't changed at all is a focus on DevX, is a focus on software fundamentals. Like, maybe we probably thought we were going to be able to lean more on some of these large models that help with code generation than we have. We thought they were going to be a lot better than they have been. They haven't. And so what largest teams that are just focused on shipping product, talking to customers, shipping product, talking to customers, and closing that loop as rapidly as possible, that hasn't changed at all. And that's where a lot of the competition's unfolding today in our space.
I mean, I think having been involved with you now for a year and a half, there's obviously a lot of things that I can point to that make Unstructured special, not the least of which is you as the founder. But one of the things that is special about this company relative to anything else that I've invested in the past, having been doing this for almost 2 decades now, is the rate at which you're being pulled into the public sector. And historically, if you met a Series A company that was talking about going into the public sector, you would sort of usher them the other way, just because it's like pushing a rock up a hill. It takes a long time. You got to have the right relationships and connections, and it always feels like you're pushing. From just the conversations you've had with some of the constituents inside the public sector, it's been really fascinating to watch how quickly the public sector is actually adopting this trend. So give the listeners a sense of like how to think about the scope and scale of the problem that the public sector is facing with, as it relates to AI, specifically as it relates to how Unstructured can solve that need, solve that pain.
Yeah, on the public sector side, it's been interesting because a lot of the investments that were made over the last 10 years have set the conditions for rapid Gen AI adoption. And so you saw AWS and Azure in particular spend a lot of time in classified environments, standing up classified cloud environments. You've seen a lot of testing over the last, since about 2017, and and efforts to implement more traditional machine learning approaches, and a lot of those failing, quite frankly. But on the other hand, rising competition from peer threat like China, and a lot of congressional funding going on in the defense side to the like rapid adoption of AI and ML for pointing into the spirit type stuff, but also back office. Like, one of the largest programs that's going on at the Department of Defense is Advana, which Databricks has a big hand in on back office automation. And so with those sort of conditions set, you had ChatGPT launch, you had Bard, you had a few of these open source models. You had a whole bunch of kind of mid-career professionals that had experience, had resources, and have the mandate to go and adopt as fast as they could. But what they also had, which the private sector didn't have during this period of time, was their measure of risk tolerance. And so in 2022 and 2023 and into early 2024, you saw in the private sector a shift among corporate leaders from ones being nervous about a recession and holding back on spend around new technology to they couldn't spend it fast enough. However, like that fear was not there in any way on the defense side. It was actually the opportunity cost of inaction was quite high, and so you saw them going into this very early. They also have lots of paper-based or document-based processes that are just ripe for displacement.
Without getting any of us in trouble, can you give us a sense of how many net new documents does a typical three-letter agency create in a day or any unit of time?
From a document standpoint, you're talking about 500,000 to a million, upwards of 2 million per day. Those are documents,
Wow.
not pages. Just to put that in perspective, we're finding as an industry that vector retrieval starts to break down at around 100 million vectors, right? And if you think about how many vectors you're creating per document, right? You're chunking it. You can generate 100 million pretty quickly, right? And so that's like a few days of work of just organizational production can overwhelm like a RAG system, which has put a lot of pressure on companies like us and others in the industry to figure out how to make Gen AI work at scale for large organizations.
One of the other interesting things about dealing with something like the public sector and the government and the defense forces is that not only can you obviously have them as great customers, the fact that they can battle test your product at the levels that you're just talking about is it's just it's amazing. It's like something you can't get from a lot of the enterprises, even if you sell it to the large end of the enterprise.
They make fantastic design partners and I think enforce a level of discipline on startups at our stage that we benefit greatly from.
What is one or two widely held views about AI and the emerging AI stack, as you've heard or as if you've seen or read from places that we all visit and people that we listen to, that you think is probably not as true as most people believe, or some personal view
Yeah.
that you might have about the space that might be different than what the consensus view might be?
I think I'm struck by two completely incongruous narratives that are both prevalent. Narrative one is that we are hurtling towards AGI, that Sam Altman is poised to be the overlord of all as the owner of AGI, and folks are absolutely terrified of that. The other side of this is that this is all a big flop. None of this is producing any value. It's the largest bubble anyone's ever seen, and none of it actually works. And I know it's overly simplistic, but I hear it almost every single day. And what's just I think stepping back here, a story that hasn't really been talked about, I think enough, is that if you look at the past like 18 to 24 months, a lot of the development that we've made as an industry is thanks to Jensen and NVIDIA, thanks to Sam, thanks to the Anthropic team, thanks to DeepMind and others. But it's also like thousands and thousands of individual engineers who have figured out how to stitch all this stuff together to make it work. And let me give you an example here. Like right now, there's like a lot of folks out there that are fine tuning embedding models. GraphRag, everyone's talking about GraphRag. That's in this nerd club that Unstructured and others are in. That's all bottom up on trying to make this stuff work. Nobody would be fine tuning embedding models or doing GraphRag if the models worked out of the box or if nothing ever made it. And that is all just being done partly through open source, but also through these like Discord channels and Slack groups and Slack channels with thousands and thousands of engineers that are all working together on this. We haven't seen that before. The move to big data after ImageNet through like the 20 teens, you never saw any of this. And so this is like new. And I think it's unique to some of these hubs like the Bay Area that have created the conditions for thousands of these engineers to work collaboratively that were disconnected before to try and figure this stuff out.
So as you kind of play that out and think about the next entrepreneur, whether it's in the Bay Area or other places, and you had to give them advice, they want to build something in AI, as does everybody right now. What advice would you give to that next entrepreneur that's trying to build something of value to the world as the stack innovates and goes by leaps and bounds every given week? So what would you
Yeah.
advise those entrepreneurs?
Well, this might be like bad news for like folks in PhD programs, but I would not start with technology in search of a problem. I would search for the problem in need of technology. And I know that goes like broadly, but there's a lot of amazing companies
Mhm.
Databricks that emerged from a technology and search of a problem, right? I
Mhm.
think that's a very dangerous game to play these days, just with the pace of innovation being what it is. However, you cannot go wrong if you
Mhm.
start with unmet customer problems and you go orchestrate the best technology that you can at the time, and that you have an extreme willingness to adapt
Mhm.
over time, because that's just that willingness to adapt is absolutely essential given the pace of development in the market right now.
Totally agree. And I think this is where the mentality, the passion, the motivations of the founder related to the market that they're going after is so much more important today than ever before because, and we've discussed this many times over drinks and dinner, it's like the half life of something that is being built today is so short in some cases because the next version
Yeah.
that gets launched by OpenAI could basically make what you've built redundant, and iterating and pivoting and figuring out where that way, how to weave yourself through that is going to take a lot of work, a lot of skill.
And I think like part of this, Karan, that has you made a joke, and it was a great joke at the time, but that you said, "Hey, we're the Area 51 of startups. Only the government knows about us. You guys need to get it together on marketing." And I went and hired Stephanie and Chris on our marketing team, and we created a brand. And boy, did I learn the value of brand over like the last year and a half on being able to stand out from the crowd, but also like give folks a sense of what are you trying to do? What's the promise that you're making to them? Like when you show up or
Mhm.
they engage with your product. And this is not a foot race that's purely unfolds through technology, through bar charts and scatter plots on your performance, but it also
Mhm.
is what's the soul of your company? What's the soul of your brand? And what are the promises that you're making to your users? That matters a lot for the success of your startup.
That's great. Let me end with this one last question, which is as you think about Unstructured's future, what is the thing that excites you the most about AI's future and then Unstructured's role inside of it?
I think that we have an opportunity at Unstructured to be like the critical enabling scaffolding between human generated data and foundation models. And the potential for us to serve that role is incredibly motivating to everybody at the company. I think that this is a very shallow trough of disillusionment, if you want to use that term, in terms of the arc of generative AI adoption. The pace of adoption is moving at a rate that is going to surprise a lot of us over the next 12 or 18 months. And we feel honored to be able to be a part of that and to be a critical enabling layer for large organizations that are trying to make this work.
I will say the last couple of years of being on your board and being your partner has been a complete privilege and honor, and frankly, a ton of fun as we see this market evolve and see how you've been building the company, hiring the team, and solving all of these pain points for our customers. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being on the podcast today as well.
Thanks, Karan. Appreciate it.